He told you he was ready. He even believed it. He said it over dinner. The good kind. The kind where he reached across the table and held your hand like a man who had done this before and learned something. And he had. That's the part nobody warns you about. He is not a boy fumbling through his first attempt at love. He is a man who has already stood at an altar, signed the paperwork, split the furniture, and walked out of a courtroom holding a folder. He knows exactly how a marriage dies because he watched one do it slowly, in his own house, in real time. So when he looks at you and says, "This time is different," he is not lying. He just hasn't read the fine print on himself yet. And by the time you notice the fine print, you have already fallen in love with a man who is, technically, still under construction. 1. The catch that comes with a receipt. On paper, dating a divorced man is the upgrade everyone tells you to want. He is past the phase where he confuses silence with mystery. He communicates. He has a therapist now, which he mentions the way other men mention a gym membership, proudly and without consistently going. He has been humbled by a thing that does not humble most men until they're 40. This is not a niche situation you wandered into. About 40% of all marriages in the United States involve at least one partner who has been married before. And in 2022, 23% of all marriages were remarriages. Roughly 42 million American adults have been married more than once. You are not the exception. You are the statistical norm wearing a new dress. And men, specifically, do not stay single politely. The remarriage rate for previously married men runs far higher than for women, around 32 per 1,000 versus 17 per 1,000. Translation: he was always going to remarry. The only open question was whether the woman he chose would be a destination or a detour. You learn quickly that he arrives with a history that has its own customer service line. There is the ex-wife, of course. There may be children. There may be a lawyer he still has saved in his phone under her actual name, no longer Snake, which he considers personal growth. And there is the receipt, the literal one. Even when he is separated from his ex-wife, he often still carries financial obligations tied to him. Child support, alimony, and transparency around those is treated by every expert alive as the foundation of trust in the new relationship. So you find yourself, somewhere around month 4, doing math you never agreed to do. His math, her math, the kid's math. You did not just fall for a man, you inherited an entire accounting system. 2. The ghost who pays rent. The first thing you learn is that the first wife never fully leaves. She just changes addresses. If there are children, she is in your group chats by proxy, a recurring character in a show you didn't audition for. The custody calendar lives on the fridge like a second religion. You memorize her pickup times before you memorize her face. There are texts at 9 on a Tuesday that are technically about a dentist appointment and somehow take 40 minutes to resolve. You tell yourself it's logistics. It is logistics. It is also a marriage that didn't fully die, just got reorganized into a co-parenting LLC. And the experts are blunt about why this matters. If you're dating a divorced man with kids, you're dating the whole package, including to some degree the ex-spouse, because shared custody means co-parenting with both him and his children's mother. Nobody puts that on the dating app bio. The bio says family-oriented. The bio does not say comes with a permanent third party and a recurring calendar invite. You meet her eventually, at a soccer game maybe, or a graduation, where you stand 3 feet apart performing the great American ritual of 2 women being aggressively normal at each other. She is polite. You are polite. Everyone is so polite that the air goes thin. Later in the car, in the silence, he says, "That went well," and you both pretend that's a sentence that means something. The harder truth is the one the relationship coaches keep circling. Emotional healing doesn't follow the court timeline. The paperwork may be finalized, and the parenting schedule may be running smoothly, but emotional disentanglement usually takes far longer. The divorce is legally over. It is not over. There's a difference, and you live inside it. So you become an expert in a ghost. You know her coffee order from a story he told once. You know which song he can't listen to anymore. You know the anniversary he'll be quiet on without telling you why, and you've learned not to ask. Because asking makes you the suspicious one, the insecure one, the one who can't just let a man have a feeling. He is moving on. He is genuinely moving on. He's just doing it in a house where someone else's handwriting is still on the wall, and you're supposed to find that romantic. The marriage isn't haunted. That would be dramatic. It's just that someone moved out and forgot to take all of themselves with them. 3. The walls he calls boundaries. By now you've noticed he has rules, not stated rules, felt ones. There are conversations that close like doors. There are nights he's fully present, and nights he's a man watching his own life from across the room. A divorced man often holds very clear, rigid boundaries as a self-protection mechanism. He has built walls around his heart, and it takes genuine care and trust before he lets his guard down. Which sounds noble in a magazine and feels, in practice, like dating a very kind security checkpoint. He calls it boundaries, and to be fair, some of it is. But some of it is a man who got hurt badly enough that he installed a system, and you are being quietly, constantly evaluated by it. Some divorced men become hyper-aware and hypersensitive, taking time before they trust, testing you before they confide in you. You will not always know you are being tested. You will only know you passed because the door opens another inch, and you feel pathetically grateful, the way you shouldn't have to feel about being trusted by someone who chose you. The comparison is the part that gets you, not the spoken kind. He'd never. He's too evolved for that. It's the architectural kind, the way the relationship is built on top of the floor plan of the last one. Every guide on earth tells the new partner to avoid comparing herself to the ex, as if the comparison were optional, as if you weren't standing in a house that was decorated for a different woman's taste. And here's the cruelest little irony. The healthier ones are easier to spot precisely because of how they talk about it. A man who's done the work tends to speak about his past with clarity, not bitterness, and not nostalgia either. So you find yourself listening to how he tells the story more than what's in it. Too much venom and he's still married to the fight. Too much fondness and he's still married to the dream. You're not looking for a verdict. You're looking for a tone of voice. You have become a forensic linguist of one man's heartbreak. You wanted to be loved. Instead, for a while, you get to be vetted. You stay anyway, because when the wall comes down, the view is genuinely good. You just didn't plan to spend this much of the relationship being a person someone else has to recover enough to deserve. 4. The timeline. Nobody puts on the invitation. At some point you do the math on him, the way he did the math on his old life, and the numbers are not on your side. There's a rule of thumb therapists pass around like a family recipe. The general guideline is roughly 1 year of healing for every 5 to 7 years of marriage. So if he was married for a decade, you are, statistically, dating a man who needs about 2 years just to stop bleeding. Other estimates land in the same place, an average of 18 to 24 months to recover, depending on whether he actually processed the grief or just outran it. And the ones who lost a whole identity in the divorce, the husband, the homeowner, the guy with the in-laws, often need 18 to 36 months to build a stable new sense of who they are. You met him somewhere in that window. You just didn't get told which month. This is where the word rebound starts whispering at you in the dark. You've heard the statistics, the scary ones. A rebound after divorce lasts an average of about 5 months, with 68% ending within the first 6, and only 15% leading to marriage within 2 years. You count backward from your first date to his divorce, and the number is smaller than you'd like it to be. And you lie awake wondering if you are the love of his life or the soft landing. But here's the plot twist the research quietly hands you, the one nobody puts on a throw pillow. The doom is overstated. One major study found no effect of time on whether a second relationship survives. People who jumped quickly into something new did not have higher breakup rates. People in new relationships were actually more confident and had more resolution about their ex. And the speed of starting was linked to greater psychological and relational health, suggesting rebound relationships may be far more beneficial than we assume. So the timeline is real, and the timeline is also a myth. Both. You can be the rebound and the destination. He can be unhealed and in love with you. These are not contradictions. They're just the actual terms of the deal, written in a font small enough that you only read it once you've already signed. What wears on you isn't the waiting. It's that the clock is his, and you're the one watching it. 5. The stepmother audition. Then there are the kids, who did not ask for you, and would like you to know it. Maybe they're polite, maybe they're feral. Either way, you walk into a role that has terrible PR going back centuries. Nobody dreams of being the stepmother. The cultural fear is real. Second wife syndrome, the wicked stepmother casting, The assumption that you've signed up to be jealous of a woman who still shares a child with the man you love. This is not a small life choice you're making. It's a demographic. About 15% of American children live in blended families, and over 1,300 new stepfamilies form in the United States every single day. You are joining a quiet, enormous club whose membership card is a casserole dish you bought for a custody weekend dinner that the children pushed around their plates in silence. Nobody tells you how long it takes either. The U.S. National Stepfamily Resource Center puts it bluntly. It can take a minimum of 4 years for stepkids and stepparents to feel comfortable with one another. 4 years. That's not a honeymoon phase. That's a sentence with the possibility of parole. You will love these children before they love you back, if they ever do, and you'll do it while pretending the love is mutual so the dinner table stays calm. And you'll learn the hardest house rule of all. You have responsibility without authority. You make the lunches, you remember the inhaler, you sit through the recital, and when it counts, you are still the guest. You discipline nothing, you decide nothing. Research has documented for decades what stepparents already know. Many kids stay hostile to a parent's new partner for years, tangled in loyalty to the parent who left. It isn't personal. It feels deeply personal. Both things. Again, at once. You wanted a family. You got a probationary position in someone else's, with great hours and no benefits. And on the good nights, when one of them falls asleep against your shoulder during a movie and forgets to hate you, you feel something so big and so unauthorized that you don't dare name it out loud. 6. The second marriage math. Eventually, somebody at a wedding, yours ideally, raises a glass and says the second time's the charm. And you smile, because the alternative is showing them the spreadsheet. The numbers everyone politely ignores are these. First marriages end in divorce at around 41%. Second marriages end at roughly 60%. Third marriages, 73%. The odds get worse with practice, which is the opposite of how the rest of life works. And the moment children from a prior marriage are stirred in, it tilts further. The divorce rate for second marriages, where one partner has children, runs over 65%. And when both partners bring kids, it climbs to around 70%. The lie buried inside the optimism is the assumption that pain teaches. Family experts have noted the cruel pattern for years. People assume they'll do better the second time because of what the first failure taught them. And most simply make the same mistakes again, older but not wiser. The divorce was supposed to be the tuition. Turns out a lot of people pay the tuition and skip the class. You should hear the counter-evidence too, because it exists and it matters. The data on stepfamily divorce is genuinely messy and inconsistent. Some researchers, looking again at the same census numbers, put the realistic stepfamily divorce rate closer to 45 to 60%, and note that couples who actually get educated about remarriage and blended life do measurably better. The catch is the part that should keep you up at night more than the statistics. Fewer than a quarter of remarrying couples seek any kind of help before walking down the aisle, and fewer than half even read a single book about it. Everyone wants the better odds. Almost nobody wants the homework. So you become, against your will, a person who knows the divorce rate of her own marriage on the day she gets engaged. That's the tax on doing this with your eyes open. You don't get the clean fairy tale where you simply believe in love. You get love plus actuarial tables. You get the ring and the risk in the same little box. And you say yes anyway. Of course you do. Knowing the odds has never once stopped a human being from betting their whole heart on a long shot they happen to love. 7. Why you stay and what it quietly makes of you. Here's what the statistics can't measure, which is most of it. You stay because somewhere in all the logistics and the ghost and the 4-year clock, there's a man who has actually done the unglamorous work of becoming better. A man who's been through divorce is often more self-aware, more deliberate about communication, clearer about what he values. Precisely because the last version of him learned the hard way what silence and avoidance cost. He doesn't take a quiet Sunday for granted. He's seen the other thing. He knows what it is to lose a whole life and survive it. And a man who knows that loves differently, carefully, like someone who has read the warranty. But you should be honest about what it makes of you, because no one mentions that part on the engagement post. You become patient in a way you never volunteered to be. You become fluent in a heartbreak that isn't yours. You learn to hold space for a grief you didn't cause and can't fix. And somewhere along the way, You stop keeping score of whose past is taking up more room in the present, because keeping score was making you small. You give more than feels fair, more than once, and you watch it slowly stop feeling like a sacrifice and start feeling like the shape of love you actually chose. And some nights, late, kitchen light nights, after the kids are asleep and the custody calendar is set for the week, you catch yourself wondering who you'd have been if you'd married someone with no history at all. Someone clean, someone uncomplicated. And the honest answer, the one that surprises you, is probably someone with less depth and a much shorter list of things she understands about people. That's the trade nobody puts in the vows. You wanted a love story. You got a love story with footnotes, a second family, an ex who'll outlast some of your friendships, and a man who came to you already broken in and trying his best with the parts that still don't quite fit. You didn't marry a fresh start. You married a survivor, and you became one too. Everybody says they want a man who's been through something. They just forget that through means he's carrying it. And now, so are you. And the strange, stubborn miracle is that some mornings, you'd still pick up the whole heavy thing again.